Hello, this is John Passmore at the Old Man Sailing YouTube channel. And this is what I would like to call the Sunday story. I should explain. A little while ago I ran an experiment. I posted some video of the water going past and me scampering around the decks. And instead of a commentary, I recorded a post from my blog. People could either listen to it or watch it or do both. And I asked them whether they liked it. And an awful lot said they liked it very much. And so I'm going to do that every Sunday. But instead of recording a post from my blog, I'm going to record a chapter or two from my books. Every Sunday, a different book. And we'll start with the first one, the original Old Man Sailing, Some Dreams Take a Lifetime. It's dedicated to Tamsin, who kept everything together, and also for Owen and Liana, Theo, Lottie and Hugo, who all said, go for it. The epigraph is from Søren Kierkegaard, the Danish philosopher, who said, life can only be understood backwards, but it must be lived forwards. Chapter 1. In the southern part of the Caribbean are the ABC Islands, Aruba, Bonaire and Curacao. Lying 40 miles off the coast of Venezuela and out of the hurricane zone, they are a favorite destination for ocean cruisers. These smiling, suntanned people in t-shirts and floppy hats form a loose community who sail the world for no better reason than sheer pleasure. They are not on a sailing holiday. You could say their lives are one long holiday. Ever since they stepped off the treadmill of jobs and mortgages and family commitments, they have claimed their lives as their own. In a variety of boats, some bigger than others and some certainly smaller and scruffier, free spirits like these have been wandering the sailing routes of the world for more than 70 years. For some, it might be a brief period of freedom before they settle down to the responsibilities of real life. Others live aboard and cruise the world as a retirement project, the culmination of years of planning and saving. And for some, for the lucky few, it is their life. They have no homes or ties ashore. They roam endlessly, meeting old friends at ocean crossroads, setting off again for no better reason than that the wind is blowing, the sun is shining, and something is calling them. If you were to ask them what it is that drives them to haul up their anchors, shake out their sails, and let the wind take them, they would probably give a shrug and a shy smile. If you have to ask, you will never understand. And that was what I wanted, to be one of the lucky few. For almost as long as I can remember, all I ever dreamed about was living on a boat and sailing the world. For one reason or another, this had never happened. Yet in March of 2020, I could feel myself within touching distance. I might be 70 years old and well behind schedule, but in Samsara I had my perfect boat. My time was my own. Indeed, I had begun to describe myself as a liveaboard. I would go home for Christmas and for the family skiing holiday at Easter. In the summer, we would all meet up for a week in an Airbnb somewhere near a secure harbour, and for another week, the youngest would join me for Guinness and sailing in Ireland. We do like Ireland. But for the rest of the time, it was just me and my boat. Periodically, I would sit in my little cabin all alone and hug to myself the realization that finally, after all this time, the dream was coming true. Of course, I wasn't quite there yet. If I looked out of my cabin window, I did not see the waving palms of the ABC Islands. Instead, I saw Lowestoft. Now, I won't hear a word against Lowestoft. Lowestoft is a great little town. There was a time when Britain ate kippers for breakfast that the local fishing fleet landed 600 million herrings in a single day. It is not like that now. Indeed, Lowestoft today might prompt that particular British cliché, a faded seaside resort. But it suited me. In particular, there was the Lowestoft Cruising Club, which runs a not-for-profit marina, and there are not many of those about. Whenever I need to spend a few weeks alongside, either for some maintenance on the boat or to work on my network marketing business, I head for the Lowestoft Cruising Club. They welcome me, pleasantly enough, but seem to realize that I just want to be left alone. That is to say, they invite me to their social gatherings and their fish and chip suppers, but they are not offended if I prefer to stay on the boat. All the same, this was not the Caribbean. Maybe that was why I became addicted to the Ocean Cruising Club's Facebook page. There, the real ocean cruisers would swap tips on where to find the best anchorages in the Tobago Keys and discuss the latest changes in the visa requirements for Indonesia. There were pictures of beach barbecues and the Whitsundays and clam bakes on the Chesapeake. And then there was the post from the Norwegian yacht Escape West. We are in Curacao, waiting for the morning light to go into our reserved space in the Spanish waters. Then the Coast Guard call us and tell us Curacao is closed. We cannot enter their waters. Go away. We left St. Martin Sunday evening, and then Curacao was open, and all we spoke to there said they had heard nothing of closing, so we left. Now we are here with my wife, myself, and our 5-year-old. Low on supplies and tired after the passage. Curacao authorities tell us to go. But where? We understand the virus threat and respect that. But we cannot just go without knowing where and being prepared. I looked up Curacao. I looked up St. Martin. The little family had sailed 500 miles, and that was 500 miles downwind. If they were forced to return to St. Martin, they would have to beat back all the way into the trade wind. That was if St. Martin would take them back. I cooked dinner worrying about them. They were called Dag and Teresa, and the little boy was Vettel. In the meantime, they had no choice but to stand off and on the island, negotiating by VHF radio, and using the mobile signal to update Facebook. All around the world, I imagined, there would be people rooting for them. But what could they do? It was the same for everyone. French Polynesia was closed. Visiting yachts had been told to leave Florida's Key West. Marinas in France and Spain were in lockdown. Panama was still open, apparently, but crews coming from the Caribbean were not allowed ashore. Someone who had hauled out for maintenance on the Costa Blanca could not get their boat back into the water because the boatyard staff had been sent home. Now they had to cope with 3 children under the age of 8 who could not be allowed on deck because it was a 3-meter drop to the ground. I could see that I had nothing to complain about, particularly now that Curacao authorities were telling Escape West that they would use force to remove the vessel from their waters. But wait, what was this? France had banned all forms of pleasure boating entirely. Any recreational vessel found in French territorial waters would be arrested, said the communiqué. Marinas were refusing to open locked gates. Bridges remained closed. Bridges? There was a bridge in Lowestoft. It was the only thing which kept the town together. Indeed, technically speaking, half of Lowestoft is in Norfolk and half in Suffolk. The dividing line being Lake Lothing, gateway to the Broads. It runs geometrically through the centre of the town, and the bridge was between me and the open sea. According to the almanac, it opened 12 times a day on request. What if the Lowestoft harbour master followed the lead of his French counterparts and started refusing requests? I stopped worrying about the crew of Escape West. Instead, I worried about me. I began to pace up and down, 3 steps from one end of the cabin to the other. There's no room to pace sideways. There was only one thing to do: get out now. Why not? Imagine if I left it until tomorrow and got stuck for the duration. I would never forgive myself. They were saying this lockdown might last 3 months. But where to go? Well, that didn't matter right now. The Royal Norfolk and Suffolk Yacht Club had a marina on the other side of the bridge. Admittedly, they did charge an arm and a leg for an overnight stay. I consider all commercial marinas would take payment in body parts if they could get away with it. Anyway, the long and short of it was that I called up the cruising club's moorings officer, thanked him for his hospitality, and promised to leave a modest cheque in the letterbox. I was gone within the hour. This compulsion to sail whenever I please and on a whim, without so much as a by your leave, might need a bit of explaining. When I was 5 years old, my family went on holiday to Cornwall, where my father decided to hire a little sailing dinghy on the Helford River. He had owned boats before the war. He bought his first at the age of 17 and didn't know what the shrouds were for. When my grandfather turned up for a sail, wearing a reefer jacket, white trousers, and a perky little yachting cap, the mast fell down. Still, father went on to teach himself a thing or two and owned a succession of yachts before the war. On the Helford, he gave me the tiller and said, "Steer for that yellow cornfield." I did. Nobody told me to do anything else, and so I steered for it until we grounded on the other side of the river. I was amazed. I had brought us all this way. I distinctly remember being as thrilled as if I had crossed an ocean and discovered a new world. Since nobody complained, and neither my 2 sisters nor I had been sick or fallen in the water, when we got home, father bought a 14-foot dinghy called Wilkie. Every Sunday in the summer, the 5 of us would set out with the car full of sailbags and sandwiches, my mother waving to her friends as they queued to go into church. Mother would say, "I am sure the good Lord would rather we were out enjoying his nice fresh air than stuck in a stuffy old church." This was 1955, so she may have been risking arrest or, at the very least, public outrage. I think it all started with Wilkie. We sailed in the Walton backwaters, that maze of saltings and creeks on the east coast where Arthur Ransom set Secret Water and Paul Gallico the Snow Goose. The important point was that, unlike the hired dinghy in Cornwall, Wilkie had a tiny foredeck and a little cuddy underneath where mother used to store the dry clothes. I was small enough to get in there too. I used to pretend it was my cabin. I would emerge in jerky little stages so that people on other boats would think I was coming up the companionway steps. You can imagine my excitement when, 3 years later, father had one too many gins in the Walton and Frinton Yacht Club and ordered a folk boat. This was a 25-foot Norwegian design to be built by Cyril White at Brightlingsea. You could sleep on a folk boat. The following year we found ourselves in Holland and learned what it means for 5 people to sleep on a 25-foot boat. Father would get up in the night to check the warps. When he did this, he would step on my elder sister's face. Carol slept on a lilo on the floor. Carol would scream. Everyone else would sit up, crack their skulls on the deckhead, and then they would scream too. I still remember being rafted up in Haarlem and father telling the man on the next boat that I was a useful crew. Up until that moment, I don't think I had ever been happier. Although that day was eclipsed when I heard my parents discussing how old I would have to be before I could be trusted to sail Torgon on my own. The only cloud was that Mother insisted that 16 was too young and I should wait until I was 18. I was 8 at the time. 18 was more than a lifetime away. As things turned out, it was what happened 3 years later that tripped something in my head and sent life down a different track. In 1960, 5 single-handed sailors raced across the Atlantic for the first time. Single-handed sailing was just beginning to claim the public's attention. It had been an established possibility for years. At the end of the 1800s, Joshua Slocum, a New England sea captain, became the first man to sail alone around the world. He had been left behind by the age of steam, and rather than retire, he rebuilt a derelict Boston oyster dredger called the Spray, and defied all the gloomy predictions of the longshoremen by returning 3 years later to a hero's welcome and instant celebrity. His book is still in print today and regarded as one of the classics of the sea. Among his many wonderful stories, he credited his success to the ghostly presence of the pilot of the Pinta, one of Columbus's ships. Whenever conditions became particularly difficult, this spectre would appear at the wheel and Slocum could sleep, or so he said. And how about Vito Dumas? He was an Argentine who decided to give World War II a miss by taking his 32-foot Lee 2 around the world, via the 4 Great Capes, in other words, at the bottom of the world in the most ferocious weather it has to offer. He carried no radio in case one of the several warring nations should mistake him for a spy. At times he was so cold he stuffed his clothes with newspaper. Being a South American, he had named his boat after the initials of his 4 mistresses. The British yachting establishment, however, remained resolutely unimpressed with single-handed sailing. The editor of Yachting Monthly, the fiercely correct Maurice Griffiths, railed against the physical impossibility of a single-hander abiding by the coal regs, as they like to call the anti-collision regulations for ships. These demand that every vessel shall at all times maintain a proper lookout. How could such a thing be possible for one man alone? It was always a man, of course. But as so often happens, the rules were simply ignored. After all, if a single-hander not keeping a proper lookout was to collide with a ship, who would come off worst? Blondie Hassler, the inventor of the first efficient self-steering wind vane, announced, "I shall drown like a gentleman." It was this rather Edwardian philosophy which gave rise to the first single-handed transatlantic race. A handful of enthusiasts had been competing to become the first to make the crossing from east to west, so why not make a race of it? The only trouble was that all the yacht clubs were run by the establishment, and we know what they thought of the idea. In desperation, Hassler announced that if no club would adopt the race, then the competitors would organize it themselves, each putting in half a crown, winner takes all. Ultimately, Francis Chichester solved the problem. He was a London map publisher who had made a name for himself before the war with a series of long-distance flights in small aircraft. Now he had taken up yachting and used his connections to persuade the rear commodore of the Royal Western Yacht Club to organize the race. Once the establishment was on board, it was easy for Hassler to bring in the Observer newspaper as a sponsor, and so the Observer single-handed transatlantic race, the O-Star, was born. Of course, at 11, I knew none of this. I was still at prep school. My idea of grown-up excitement was limited to War Picture Library. These were 64-page comics in which granite-jawed Tommies bashed the Hun, shouting, "Take that, Fritz!" to which Fritz would reply, "Donner und Blitzen," or sometimes "Gott in Himmel." Mind you, I think that by 1960 I might have graduated to the RAF. A boy called Boddington had brought a genuine Spitfire pilot's helmet to school. It smelled of sweat and rubber and had P.O. Boddington inked on the inside. For the price of a Mars bar, young Boddington would lend it out. Since the tuck shop's allowance was only one Mars bar a week, this became a fortnightly event at best. The excitement of hiding under the bedclothes with a torch, eating the other Mars bar in a flying helmet while fantasizing at Angels 15 can only be imagined. Boddington, as far as I remember, was a fat boy to begin with. He didn't get any thinner. But then Francis Chichester won the O-Star, and it transpired that somebody at the Walton and Frinton Yacht Club knew him well enough to persuade the great man to come down from London one miserable winter's night and give an illustrated talk to the members. My parents took me along. The slide projector broke down halfway through, and Chichester was as self-deprecating as only true heroes can be. But I could see through the casual asides about gales and gear failure. I could see the excitement in changing sail on a plunging foredeck, the thrill of being joined by a racing pigeon 1,000 miles from land. One day, I said to myself, I would sail oceans too. Single-handed, of course. With a natural gift for exaggeration even then, I took it a stage further. I would live on my boat all by myself. My adventures would be every bit as exciting as if I lived in the pages of War Picture Library. That was more than half a century ago, but I can still feel the thrill of anticipation and still remember the disappointment at my parents' reaction when I told them. I think the expression that comes to mind was, "That's nice, dear." Sometimes parents have no imagination. To be continued. But if you want to know what happens next and you don't want to wait 9 weeks, you can always go to oldmansailing.com, where you will find a books page and links to all of my books on Amazon. This one is called Old Man Sailing. Some dreams take a lifetime. Until next week, goodbye.